this, some of the best critics of Zionism come from within Israel itself. She comes from that sort of progressive, intellectual Jewish tradition that has very little in common with Netanyahu and the people that just think that bombing innocent women and children is somehow, God's rule. So I've been musing and struggling with this book and reading it and thanking Jacqueline for her craftsmanship. And, there's a lot of work to be done if we're going to try and reconstruct this planet from the chaos of all these wars. But I do believe philosophy is part of the key and part of the answer. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So any questions, comments, feedback?
Lots of comments.
Go for it, now's the time, yeah.
Yeah, I have to sort my thoughts first, I think. But a lot of what you say, I think I would like to start with my dreamscape. Because my dream, my utter dream and hope for the future is a world with no borders. Because
Right.
we are all citizens of this earth, and it's the only home we have. And no one has more right to any part than anyone else. It all belongs to us as humans. And you can't say that, no, you have no right to be here because this is mine. That's not true. It's ours. We need to learn to share. We need to learn to feed each other. And when it comes to saying about differences between cultures, I remember I said to a Chinese lady, and I said, you know what? We are more alike than we are different. We might use different words, but our basic values are exactly the same. There is no difference between you and me.
Yeah, we're all human.
Yeah, but also the basic values we have. The value of family, the value of love, the value of empathy, taking care of each other. We all have the same, we all have the same goals.
As we're going to see in a minute when we look at the periodic table, because I go into the values and virtues of each box in some detail.
We're all on the same page in a sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we don't realise it. And then we let some people...
But you were a teacher for many years, weren't you, in Norway?
Yes.
And part of our job as teachers is to bring that out for whether we're teaching adults or children. Because the media gives a different story, doesn't it? It's about difference and, division.
It's the word. It's how they use words, the rhetoric of the news, for example.
Sure, it's all
or if you
fear.
take Netanyahu, his rhetoric. He's
Putin,
a war, and Putin
he's a master of it. Yeah.
But they are both warmongers.
Absolutely, and that starts with language and,
it does.
Divisive language.
And of course they use terror, because if you oppose them, in Russia you fall out of windows and stuff.
Sure, and in Nazi Germany or Stalin's Russia, totalitarian rulers have been doing this.
2 pages of the same book.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a new film out which I want to watch about the Nazi conquest of Norway, and some chap standing up against them. And
Genau.
I don't know if it's based.
Yeah, we know.
Is it based on a true story?
Yeah.
It is.
I've been around the Museum of the Resistance in Oslo, which is about that period. That's fascinating.
Gunnar Sandsteby, you will probably have seen a statue of him with a bicycle.
Okay.
He moved around in Oslo
On a bicycle.
on a bicycle.
Was he famous for his bicycle?
He was
Very
famous
well.
for actually something might have been exaggerated all the time, but he was a messenger between the resistance, and he brought arms, and eventually.
When he was young, he was young.
He was quite young.
And eventually they built various bits of Sten guns, which they built in various workshops around in Oslo.
Right.
So he picked up parts from one place.
Okay,
and
no, I'm
picked
going to
up
watch
other-
that film with
yeah.
great interest. We had, when the Germans occupied Batet here
Mm-hmm.
in World War II, there were Germans running the village, because they were run from Guéret, which was their like headquarters. And there was a resistance here.
Yeah.
When I first moved to the village, the mayor introduced me to the eldest woman in the village. She was in her 90s, I think she's dead now, whose boyfriend was in the resistance. And they had like a lunch
My
which
dad
they went
was,
to.
yeah.
Your dad was in the Norwegian resistance?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was doing, spying, really. I still have the photographs because we lived in Bergen.
Right.
And, the Håkonsvern, it's the main Navy base.
Oh, is it? Yeah,
It
I
was-
haven't been to Bergen yet. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
And he lived by the...
Marieholmen.
Sorry. Huh?
It was Marieholmen.
Yeah, on Marineholmen at that time, I
Was in
suppose.
Poland.
And the U-boat bunker was close by. But they had a flat facing the harbour. And one of his jobs were to take photographs of all the ships coming in.
Oh, I see, surreptitiously.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, yes. And also he was running messages and stuff, and he had guns. And Mum
And
told
5
me,
cars during the war, and he was really annoyed because the Germans always got them. He even tried to hide them in
of course,
caves
yeah.
and everything.
Yeah.
They would find them.
Yeah,
the
and he got
cars,
so
yeah.
annoyed.
But he actually had
Well, there
he
is
had
a...
some rifles, and Mum told me she was terrified because they were young, both of them. They're born.
This is your father.
This is my dad, yeah.
Right.
And they came to do a raid.
He's dead now, is he?
Yeah, he's dead now. He would have been more than 100. He was born in 1919.
My mum was born in 1914.
Oh,
So
right,
we
yeah.
you know.
And my mum
Same
was
generation.
my mum's is that too. She was born in 1923, but and she
youngster.
was quite young during the war, a young mum. And I don't know if you've heard about the big explosion in Bergen. There was
What year was that?
that was in 1944.
During the war?
During the war.
Yeah.
Blew away.
Yeah.
It was an armor ship, a ship with
With ammunition?
ammunition ship,
Full of
yeah,
ammunition.
and
Okay.
it was docked.
Did they blow it up? Did the resistance blow it up?
No, actually, it was a bomber,
RAF.
and one bomb came straight down the chimney.
Because my granddad, he would take pictures of the boats so very often in the mountains as well. And he would obviously give messages to the RAF and to the British,
Yeah.
So that was a British bomber that...
an
Yeah.
RAF that came in. And he had the picture of it
Oh.
with the plane and the bomb.
Oh, really?
Coming
Of
down,
that
yeah.
one going up?
Yeah, but I took that because we had, it was 50 years since the war, so I actually wore my granddad's uniform and all his pictures and everything to tell them, because I was very
Was this at
interested in
school or
history, yeah. And
Oh.
that was year 6 in primary, but unfortunately, someone took that picture.
Oh, no.
So I haven't seen it, I was really annoyed.
What, from the school when
Yeah.
you showed it?
Yeah. But
Oh,
we
dear.
still have old pictures of
Of ships.
different...
There's a saying in Yorkshire,
Ships.
they say there's now so queer as folk. You know.
And it was like, it was
But-
really annoying.
Well, my mum, when it went off, she was alone with my oldest brother.
She saw it
Arne
all
was in
happen.
bed. Yeah, it blew out half of her flat because it was just across the.
Oh, wow.
And she was
Oh.
terrified, and thankfully she didn't put my brother in his crib after she'd fed him and changed him,
Oh.
because that was absolutely covered in glass.
Oh, my God, the crib.
The crib, yeah.
Oh.
So she just grabbed the boy and ran
And she had
to
a
find-
feeling.
to find. Huh?
Yeah, she told me it because she used to have a big table in the living room, and there was an old chandelier, and that's where she usually
Hid
would,
under.
but where she would change him.
Right.
But she told me that she went in to change, and she said she doesn't know, she didn't know why, but she felt no, and she took him up and then went into the kitchen where they didn't have windows,
Okay.
and the minute she was in,
The bomb went
The
off.
bomb went off.
And the
the
chandelier.
the ship went up. And she ran in
Ah.
to find
That's interesting.
my dad, and she had different shoes on her feet, and she was so terrified. And also because her mum and siblings They
Yeah.
lived on the other side, behind the bomb, and she didn't know
Oh.
what had happened because that part, Sandviken,
Hmm.
that part of the
Yes.
was almost obliterated,
Oh wow.
and it
It's
was
like
was
the explosion in Lebanon
Yeah.
lately.
In Beirut.
actually,
In
and
Beirut.
also because
Yeah,
it was all
yeah, I was thinking
wooden.
about
It
that.
was all wooden.
We still don't know
buildings.
what caused that.
No,
And we
they
had
all-
friends
thank,
that live
thank
there.
God they all survived, but she didn't know that, and she ran in and she said what she saw on her way in to find
Mm.
that was she never forgot that.
So
It
two
was-
things. Can I just do a comment philosophically about that, and then let's move on and do our
Yeah.
box, right? One is that something I'm very interested in is parapsychological experiences during times of emergency, things like telepathy or warnings or intuitions, and certain parapsychologists have studied wartime. It's a time when a lot of those kind of messages get exacerbated and increased. So your mother having an intuition not to change the baby under the chandelier is typical of that sort of thing. And it seems that fear of life and death exacerbates one's paranormal faculties. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that there is a link between espionage and philosophy. In a sense, as philosophers, we're all called to be spies for wisdom and to find truth in the battlefield situations, you know, like, say, in Israel, Gaza, and Palestine, and Ukraine and Russia. I mean, being a philosopher is a very high calling. It is like being a wisdom agent, I call it, which is a higher level than being an intelligence agent. So-called intelligence agents are actually rather stupid. Being a wisdom agent takes serious training and skill, and you have to master the periodic table,
Yeah.
because you won't be able to even get to like the first level of the training of the wisdom agent unless you know the table. All right. So let's move on and let's choose one each. Okay. Have you chosen one?
No,
There's yours. Okay. So
I'm
who's
thinking-
got one? That
I'm
they want to
thinking
go
witchcraft and Wicca, me.
into? Or are you going to do it by random?
Yeah, I'm going for the witchcraft and Wicca.
You're doing, what number is that?
That is 23.
Okay, witchcraft and Wicca, yes, that's a jolly good one to choose. Okay, and I'm going to write these down, and then I'll sort of do them all at once. Okay, Mark, have you got one?
This is difficult.
You just do it at random.
Jehovah's Witness.
Okay, that's a nice one. What number's that?
134.
Okay. Yes. Right.
Oh, that's a Christian thingy.
Thingy. A branch of it.
Okay. Have you got one?
no,
Not yet.
I had one, but I forgot which.
Just do it randomly with your finger, that's fine. Because you can be guided by intuition.
It's a philosophy, science, and general system theory.
Okay. That's number 157. Yeah. Okay. That's a good one. Right.
And I can't make up my mind.
Well then close your eyes
And put your finger in it.
Close
Let
your
your,
eyes.
Let you do
your-
a point for you.
and just put your finger above.
then you'll feel it. In your fingertip.
Mine
Don't open your eyes.
Let it move.
Not too close to the candle there.
That's fine, she's quite safe. Okay.
No.
No, don't look.
No, I'm not looking.
Okay, go fine.
Oh,
What have you got?
Eclectic goddess worship.
no.
109, isn't it? No, you went.
No, it was the
No.
grey one.
Grey one,
wasn't
yeah.
it?
108.
108, which is
Radhaswami.
okay, Radhaswami.
What's
Right.
that?
Well, we're about to learn.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so I'm going to go in I normally go in the sort of the order of longevity, so the earliest one go first. I'm going to start with number 23, which probably has claims to be the oldest of these four. And so witchcraft is very interesting as a tradition when you look at it through the lens of religious studies, because different. I mean, when I did my history degree, I studied eclectically all world history because being an omnivore, I wanted to know all periods of world history. But I was forced to choose modern history, and from 1500 onwards, and I did papers in early modern European history. Fascinating stuff. And of course there was the huge witchcraft trials and persecutions at that time, which were not really central to what we were supposed to be learning, but of course I was learning all the interesting bits. So I went and did an extra course at Birkbeck College, where Jacqueline teaches, given by one of Britain's leading historians on the history of witchcraft, who was Professor Michael Hunter, and he's written about the sources on which we can base our knowledge about witchcraft persecutions, particularly in Britain, but it was about Europe in general. We have a lot of records of trials, and he talked about all that, and I learned, and subsequently, I've collected a library of stuff to do with the history of witchcraft. It's absolutely fascinating. So initially, there wasn't any kind of persecution of witches. It was, when the Anglo-Saxons came off the boats, they were all pagan. They were rune users. So they weren't going to persecute other pagans. What they weren't too happy about was people misusing their magical or occult powers for negative outcomes, and in fact, that I think is a common sense approach. So much later, I discovered, when Queen Elizabeth I was the Queen, she said, because people would bring witchcraft trials to courts, and so they wanted the Queen to say, is witchcraft illegal or not? Like, should we be punishing these people? She said, only if they're misusing their occult powers to do evil, if they're using their witchy powers to kill people or stop their hearts or damage their crops or burn their houses or ruin their cattle, that is against the law. But if they're healers, if they're using their skills as midwives, as therapists, or helping with herbal medicine and giving counselling and helping people through dark times, there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. So in other words, she made a distinction between good witches and black witches. Black witches, if you can prove that they've been up to no good, they should face some kind of penalty.
Must be consequences.
Was the position. There should be some consequences. So during the course of the 16th century, after Elizabeth went, James became king, and he was a bit more superstitious. He lacked, I think, Elizabeth's nuanced mind, and was a bit more anti-witchcraft and a bit more puritanical. And when I lived in Scotland, the Scots have never forgiven him for this. I used to get accused of, remember what James did to us, because I met lots of Scottish witches. Right? They're still angry. I think the word witch is interesting. It seems to be related to the word wit, which meant intelligence or intellect, mind, in Anglo-Saxon. So a witch is simply an intelligent person. This is my handy Anglo-Saxon dictionary. In the sense of being aware of interdimensionality. A witch is someone that knows about different dimensions of being, is in touch with the spirit world, can channel it and use it to heal and help and educate and advise. So they were the elders and respected people of their community. And I think one question I've always had is, what was the distinction between the witch and the druid? Say in the Celtic world, they were called druids, people like that. Witch is an Anglo-Saxon word. In the Gaelic Gaelic, Irish and Welsh world, they were called druids. And they came in different degrees of knowledge and background. It took 20 years to train as a druid. So you'd begin with basic stuff. But the witches and the druids, we still work together, we respect each other. I have many friends who are witches. I've done ceremonies with them, rituals, prayers. They come to Stonehenge, and I think, and the cosmologies are very similar. We work with the four directions, we work with the four elements, we work with the pantheon of gods and goddesses, and we are there for healing and for the celebration of life. You know, I know witches who've come here and visited, you know, from other countries, and we've gone off and done rituals together and things. So the tradition lives on. I was once referred a case as a mediator by an interesting chap who said to me, I met him on the phone, then I met him in person. He said, Brian Bourne was his name, he's dead now. He said, Thomas, because I set up a mediation service that deals with conflict between religions. He said, I've got a conflict I want you to deal with. I represent the Witch Council of Britain. We're the old school witches. We're born witches. We've been witches for the last 10,000 years. It's our family tradition. We're having real trouble with these new age, newfangled witches that have done a few workshops and trainings, seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer on TV and go around calling themselves witches. And they're really muddying our pitch because they're doing all kinds of weird stuff, which isn't what we do.
No.
And they're saying, you know, so there was a war going on between the new age, new arrived witches, youngsters, and the old school. And he asked me to mediate. So I did my best. I was a young, innocent, little academic peace studies guy trying to heal religious conflict. And I met both sides of the argument, you know. It's quite difficult to mediate complex things like that, I discovered. But I think that it's possible, and I think that the old guys maybe should accept that the newfangled lot who are influenced by Alexanders and other new type of generation of witches in the 60s they grew up. They're also valid, you know. One shouldn't be too purist and say, well, my family tree is 400 years old and you're just from the 60s. No, if they're meaning well and they're doing their work, then let them be. So anyway, that's and then Wicca, of course, was the term preferred by Gerald Gardner, who helped popularise witchcraft in Britain in the 30s, really, 20s and 30s. He wrote this famous book or several books about witchcraft. There's a museum of witchcraft in Cornwall, which has a lot of his accoutrements and things. And my friend Professor Ronald Hutton, who's a professor of history at the University of Bristol, has written some of the definitive histories of witchcraft and goes into all that stuff in depth. But Ronald and I, what he doesn't really do is go into what I call transpersonal history, which is the idea that history doesn't have to only be written records and archives. It's the history of minds, it's the history of thoughts, history of language, history of ideas. And his big thing is, well, none of these witches are genuine. You know, they're all just newfangled things. I'm not so sure, Ronald. I think that the fact that they can't prove it because they don't have like written genealogical papers going back to 1100 doesn't mean that they don't situate themselves in a lineage that does. And I'm also therefore slightly disheartened at the treatment by Margaret Murray, who was Professor of Egyptology at the University of London. She wrote some amazing books arguing that witchcraft was a thing in 11th and 12th century Britain, a secret sort of movement that had to keep quiet because of persecution from Christians. And she was attacked mercilessly by fellow academics who said, oh, she's taking drugs, she's made it all up, there's no proof, you know, sort of typical disdain. And also she was a woman, right? I think Margaret Murray was quite a brilliant person and was onto something.
There's-
So anyway, that's me.
But there's another thing I think is kind of like it, when it comes to witches and,
Yeah.
and persecution. The church at that time
Ah,
had the absolute truth. The monks were the healers, and they knew how to treat. The monks were killing people. The wise woman, the witch, were saving people. And this was
so when you say the monks had the truth, I mean you're being
yeah,
ironic.
no,
I take
what,
it to.
what I'm saying
Yeah.
is that,
You're saying they
that
thought-
when
They believed
they
so.
believed that, yeah, because they followed at that time the scripture, which was that it was all male dominance, and I mean, it was just as much, in my opinion, when I've read, and I haven't studied like you, but what I've read and pondered about, was that the prosecution of witches, especially in the Dark Ages, were because they were working against the church. And they couldn't let that happen.
Well, in
They
your
couldn't.
part of the world, in Scandinavia, I mean the church came very late.
Very
didn't
late,
it?
very late.
I mean you put up quite a good
Oh, yeah.
resistance to
You know,
Christianity.
one of the last witch that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
burnt in Bergen was married to the bishop of Bergen,
Seriously.
and she was
would be an interesting
a healer and
Didn't
a
like her.
herbalist.
Herbalist.
Why didn't they just get a divorce?
It would have been a lot
They
easier, wouldn't
couldn't.
it?
It was a Catholic church.
What year was that then? That
Oh,
was
it
before
was-
the Reformation.
Oh yeah.
Ah.
And in the Catholic Church, who had no divorce originally.
So have you studied the history of witchcraft in Norway at all? Do you know? What's the term in Norwegian, by
Well,
the way? Let's
my
just establish
grandmother
this.
was a witch. She said, "I'm
What's
a witch."
what's a witch in Norwegian?
Hex.
Hex?
A hex.
Yeah,
Mm.
an
Okay.
hex. Like you
Right.
you can throw a hex.
To hex somebody, yeah. Yeah,
So-
and that's related to the word hag, I believe, isn't it?
No,
A hag tessa. The
yeah, it could be.
etymology.
A hag. Hag could also
Oh, you're
be.
thinking of Haugtussa.
No. A hag, but that's not really a Norwegian word.
No, that was more German.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got the words for witches in all different languages in my dictionary of global philosophy, of course.
No,
It
my
should be a
great
hex.
grandmother was. She said she was a witch herself. She was from
So no, way
way
north.
up north.
Oh, right, yeah.
She died when I was
Like my
12,
friend.
but I was terrified of
So
her.
that was your mother's mother.
Yeah.
And she could see. She could see
And
things.
she was really.
We call it synsk, which is.
Yeah,
was a
she's
seer,
yeah,
she
she
was
was
a
a
seer.
seer.
Yeah.
And
that's one of the
and
things
she
they
had
do.
some tricks up her sleeves to cure certain
Right.
minor illnesses and.
Ah.
No, she was. My dad loved her to bits. I know that.
Okay.
But I didn't meet her before I was 4. And she was.
Well, you've
really
inherited some of those skills. That's brilliant.
Mm.
Okay. I want to move on, if you don't mind, because time is pressing,
Yeah.
to the next one, because we could spend the entire evening discussing
Yeah,
this
yeah.
one. It's so interesting. But we'll come back to it, circle round later maybe. I want to move on to the next one, which was the Christian one. We'll look at Jehovah Witnesses briefly, because this is like the mirror opposite of the witches, right? As a religious studies teacher, I've met Jehovah's Witnesses in school, often fellow teachers, and I had, wherever I settled, they always come round to convert me. So when I lived in Wales in this remote little cottage, they used to come once a week, and in the end, they used to come like week after week after week. We'd have really long discussions about the Bible, and I explained to them about critical biblical studies. They'd never heard of it. I explained like for 200 years, people have been studying the Bible, working out the chronology, who wrote it, which bits were written when and who by. I said, what? They thought it was all just like the word of God just poured out of molten fire onto the page.
Yeah.
So anyway, after a few months of this, they just I said, why do you keep coming around? They said, we want to learn. We're learning stuff from you that we didn't know before. I explained, look, I'm a very liberal Anglican. I'm not going to convert to Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm a Druid, I'm a pagan and a Christian and an Anglican. And I know my biblical studies, you know. So they used to come round to study with me. Anyway, then I moved here to France and I had a similar thing come round. 2 Jehovah's Witnesses came from Boussac, started coming round. They decided I was interesting and worth converting. So they'd come once a week and sit for an hour and chat in French. And it was very interesting because one of them, the woman, is a direct descendant of Voltaire,
Oh,
the philosopher and Freemason.
ah,
And I would say to her, I'd say, look, madam, you know, I'm closer to Voltaire than I think you are because I'm with the Druids and the ancient wisdom and the Freemasons and the Enlightenment period. And I like Voltaire because that was his position. What I didn't say it
What
impolitely. I said, how come you're doing this thing? You know? Anyway, we had a similar discussion about biblical studies, and I tried to explain that the thing about the Jehovah's Witnesses is that they're very detailed. Were you brought up in a Jehovah's Witness background at all?
no.
No.
Have you ever met any? Or?
Yes.
Okay. So they love their Bible. They go into it in great detail, and they've given me over the years lots of their magazines that explain it all.
Wake up in the watchtower.
That's the one, yeah. And you see, the thing is, I also love the Bible, and I've studied it in great detail, and I learned Greek and Hebrew and Latin in order to read the original. And I've done commentaries on biblical books, but also the bits of the Bible they don't study, like the books of Enoch and the Apocrypha and the Gnostic Gospels and the esoteric para-biblical writings, which they've never heard of. So they, I think that one can have a rational and intense and interesting discussion with Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, yeah.
And then when I get this out, and I used to explain to the descendant of Voltaire, like, go away and study this and come back and we'll have a good chat, you know. I think it was all a bit much for them, and because they're stuck in the one box, which is box 134. And you know, my kids, when I was teaching, they'd say, "Which box are you in, sir?" And I'd say, "Well, kind of. There's a bit of me in all the boxes. I've been a Buddhist. I'm taken initiation as a Sufi. I'm a Kabbalist, so I'm over with that lot. I'm an Anglican, so I'm a Catholic and a universal thinker. You know, I'm a philosopher and a scientist. So there's part of me in all the boxes." And some people just can't get their heads around that. They think you've got to be just in the one box.
I'm a bit like you, I think.
And I think so I love them, but I think they've got a particular angle. The other thing I like about Jehovah's Witnesses, and we'll say, is they're very good on peace. They really won't fight. They don't like wars. They've been persecuted by the Nazis and by the Soviets for their position. They won't join the army. There are Russian Jehovah's Witnesses who are in prison right now.
They are pacifists.
And they're pacifists, and I respect that because they say that, you know, Jesus doesn't want wars and battles and killings. So,
What little we sort of got to know. We have a very, very, very good friend. She's about to turn 80, Jill. So she came when we started our work on the farm on Anglesey.
okay, you were living in Anglesey.
Yeah, she obviously didn't take long, obviously, for someone from Jehovah's to pop by, and
Okay.
it was Jill and her friend.
She was 18.
No,
No,
80, he's
80.
80 now,
Oh, 80.
so
She will
she
be
was
80,
72
yeah.
when we met her.
Oh, okay.
And obviously I knew what it, that it was Jehovah's and what it was about, and I said, before we start, I'm not religious. I've never been religious, and I won't become religious. But I really respect your views and your religion. I respect you for that, but please respect me that, I'm not interested
Sure.
in
You
that.